Mr. Warren Howe, who works with and is a principal for Woodruff and Howe Environmental Engineering, previously worked as a division engineer and complex engineer with 2 poultry companies. He was responsible for capital projects, and environmental compliance at a facility level. He was also environmental engineer with Goldkist, responsible for environmental engineering and process safety management. Mr. Howe is now vice president of Woodruff and Howe Environmental Engineering, a consultant firm for the food processing and agricultural industries, specializing in environmental regulatory assistance, wastewater treatment design. Please welcome Warren Howe. Thank you, Warren.
Appreciate it. Good afternoon, guys. Let me see if we can get the next one up. I'm sorry. So again, we're going to be talking about audits. With that, when we talk about audits for environmental, we're obviously talking about a big area. So we're going to talk a little bit about audits, preparing for them, what to do kind of during them a little bit. But then we're also going to talk about, what do we need to do ahead of time to really prepare the site too? What are the problems that we might find? As we were just talking about with James, it's really important to try to do some of this ahead of time, doing your own internal audits, because that's the way you're going to help yourself find any of those issues. So when we're talking about this, always be remembering that what you're doing as an environmental manager is helping to go through that stuff yourself, try to find the problems and correct them. One of the other important things with internal audits is to try to make sure that you're talking to the facility staff about being very open. More open than you might be for somebody else, because again, the key is you're trying to find those issues so that you can correct them. No one in this industry that I know purposefully is trying to avoid a regulation or not do things they know they need to do. It's usually when there's something out there that they didn't know they needed to do, or they didn't know how to do it well. And a lot of times it's somebody at one level might know what needs to be done, but the people who are supposed to be doing it don't really know how well they need how to do it. And if they don't know how to do it, a lot of times it doesn't get done. So we'll start with that. Feel free to ask me questions at the end. At the end, we're going to go through a lot of things of like the common kinds of problems that we see when we do audits, things that are those little things that are the gotchas out there. I'll go through those fairly quick, and I probably won't go over all of them on the slides. You may see things, so feel free to ask questions at the end, or you can just come up afterwards and we can talk about some of them. So preparing for audits, 2 key things that I want to make sure we go over that's really important, particularly, the audience I'm talking to, I'm looking at like the environmental managers, people who are taking responsibility for this stuff. 1, know what you need to know. And that sounds simple enough, but environmental area is a huge arena. There are so many different regulations. There are so many different requirements. Within certain regulations, there's multiple permits, there's multiple requirements, multiple record-keeping requirements, sampling inspections. There's a lot out there. Having a grasp of that is key to being able to move forward. If you want to be able to be prepared for audits and be able to do well on them, you can't do it well unless you know exactly what your requirements are for your facility. So things like today, learning some stuff we were talking about earlier is kind of key in helping try to learn those things. The others, you might look at other environmental management courses or something, particularly if you're bringing new environmental managers in. There's a lot of times you have a safety manager that's being promoted to an EHS, environmental health and safety function, that is really good at what he does. He's great at that, managing that, but the environmental regulations are totally new to him. To give Georgia Tech a plug, there's twice a year, it's like a 4.5 day seminar called Managing Environmental Compliance. Each topic has like at least an hour, and they usually have some really good people, like SPCC regulations he talked about. The SPCC manager for EPA Region 4 is the person that does that presentation at that conference every year. So it's that kind of level and that kind of detail to really get to start learning to know what you need to know. The second thing, and we'll get to that a little bit, is putting your house in order. It's one thing to know everything you need to do, but then when I talk about putting your house in order, that's taking care of all the details. Just because you know what you need to do, and maybe you've done great training, it's not going to help unless you know everything's in place. So putting your house in order includes making sure that records are kept, and then where are they stored. People know where they're stored. You're going to be able to find them when they're there. The people are trained. They know what they're supposed to be doing. They know what inspections they're supposed to be doing. And then the second part of keeping the house in order is the aspect of when you do a walkthrough, what do you see? A large part to me on audits, when I've done it with state environmental regulatory or EPA, has been a lot of times they'll start with fairly wide eyes, and they're just kind of, and everything's kind of a brush stroke, and they're not picking little details until they find a problem. Once they find a problem, and it may not be a significant problem, it may be just the way drums are stored and they're not nice and neat, stacked somewhere, they're kind of haphazardly set, or they're set on gravel or grass and they're kind of leaning or tilting, or you have some drums that don't have bungs on them or something. Little things like that start making them look like things aren't being managed. And when they start thinking that things are not being managed, their focus gets narrower and they start looking tighter and tighter and tighter. I've talked to a lot of people about this, and other people have all agreed that it just happens. So once they start thinking that things aren't being taken care of, they're going to start looking harder at problems or for problems, and then they can start picking up even little things, and the scope of the audits just get magnified. So looking professional, looking like things are being managed, sets the tone, as we were talking about earlier. With James, he used that tone, that word, the tone of the audit. It helps set that tone of the audit, that when they come in and they think and they have that feeling and impression that things are managed and are being taken care of, their whole scope of how deep they're going kind of changes until they find problems. So that's why, to me, it's really important, putting the house in order, to taking care of all your business, make sure everything's there that needs to be there, but then also making sure things look good and are being managed can really help. So during an audit, a few things. Being polite. Again, that tone of that audit. Some people are very aggressive or nervous or scared or something else with an auditor. They're just there doing their job. Know that. I try to be helpful without, you'll see a lot of things on here that we're going to talk about, and then a lot of things that you'll hear me say. I'll be very helpful, but I'm not going to be overly helpful. I'm going to find out what they need, and I'm going to make sure I give them what they need and do it in a very professional, quick way. Again, that tone, when information can be grabbed quickly and given to them, they have that sense you're managing it, things are in good shape, and it goes easier. If people can't find information or they get resistance, then the aggression kind of can start and things just can start going downhill. So being polite, work with them, give them what they need. But again, I don't go overboard. You don't want to offer anything over what they're asking for or anything like that. So the next one, asking what the inspectors plan to audit. They may be there for a specific purpose. You want to know what that purpose is. That purpose kind of limits them on what they're there to see. And as long as you know what they need to see, then we're talking about you can escort them to those areas. You may have an area you really don't want them to see. You may be able to take them in a longer route. You can do this with OSHA things also. They come in and have a very specific something they need to see or investigate. You can be very friendly, make sure you're giving them exactly what they want. You're giving them access to what they need. If they need access to this outfall, that's great. You kind of have a choice of how you get to that outfall, and depending on what you know, something may have happened last night and you prefer to take a different route. That's just being smart. Without hiding anything, without being, lying about anything. Just if they want to get there, great. Here's a way we can get there. So we talked about making sure we're providing the documents they need, but only the documents they need. If they ask for something specific, you want to be able to give them what they ask for. But again, a lot of times you don't want to give them more than they ask for, because then they may find things. So being polite, make sure we give them what they need, but without going overboard. You don't need to give them a lot more. Let them ask for it, and then be very professional, courteous, and quick in giving them what they need. Some other quick things on audits, just formality-wise. If auditors are taking pictures, I like to make sure I take pictures. Anything that they have, I like to be able to document. If it gets to some sort of legal thing and you're talking to attorneys, that attorney is going to want to be able to see whatever pictures that they may come up with later. So if they're taking pictures, you want to be able to take pictures. So why is that important right now to think about? You need to make sure you're thinking about, do I have access to a camera? That used to be a concern. Now with phones, that's not a concern anymore. Everyone pretty much has a phone in their pocket right now. But just remember to make sure that one person's assigned to that. So when you're doing a walkthrough, if you're the main liaison and you're talking to them, you may have somebody else with you, and that person's assigned to take pictures for you so that you're not stopping and interrupting. One of those things just to think about ahead of time. Likewise, if they collect samples and they're going to analyze samples, you want to do best is to do a split sample. You collect one sample and split it. Make sure you find out what are they going to analyze that sample for. If it's a wastewater or stormwater, what analysis are they going to perform on it so you can send your sample and get analysis also. When you're doing any sort of sampling, just like any other, you want to make sure you're following chain of custody. You want to make sure you're following good and sampling procedures, make sure it's being analyzed correctly. But it's good to have those results so that you also know what to expect, or if their numbers come back totally crazy, you've got good legitimate numbers to back up. So again, that's important. You got to think ahead of time. You may need to make sure you have sample containers available. Maybe you don't have them at the feed mill, but you've got them at the processing plant where you know you can get somebody and you can get them in 10 minutes or something. Just have a way to be thinking about, if I need to collect a sample, how am I going to be able to do that? And then another thing, just another good piece of information, don't guess at questions that they ask that you don't know an answer to. If they're asking something and you don't know, you don't know it. Guessing can just get people in trouble down the road because it's either not right and then they go look and they find it not right, and then that throws huge flags and moves things in a very wrong direction. So you don't want to be wrong. You want to make sure you give them the right information. But if you actually don't know the information, you can tell them, I don't know that right now, but I'll find out. I'll look into it. I can get it. I can, give me your card. I can send it to you tomorrow, something like that. We've had a lot of times with some stormwater inspections, people were missing records. They knew they had them. They just didn't have them at the plant because someone from corporate is doing some of the visual inspection. So, that afternoon after the inspection or the first thing in the morning, they were able to fax or email over scanned copies of all the inspection reports. And when I followed back up with the regulators, they were fine with that. So if you don't have them, just let them know and let them know what can you do to get it to them or find the answer. So we'll move on into some of the preparing for audits, the putting your house in order. What are some of the problems that we typically find? What are some of the common mistakes? So we'll go through those. Again, we'll go fairly quick, and I probably won't talk about everything on all the slides to get through everything, but feel free to come and ask questions about it, or we can even take a quick question during it, all right? So there's major regulatory issues we'll talk about. You got NPDES, wastewater discharges, industrial stormwater, air permitting. Down below, talk about other regulations, and then just general issues that we see. So NPDES, some of the things just to make sure. A lot of times we find people not having copies of applications and engineering reports when systems are designed. Those are things you really need to have and try to keep, because there will be questions later that will come back to that, and having that available. So just know that those documents are really, really important to keep and have access to in the future. You may not need it during the audit, but a very good possibility that you'll need it in the future if there's other questions. We've had facilities that are getting new things being added to their permits, like nitrates, and we were able to go back to 1968 and find permit applications where it was addressed and what concentrations, and because the designations of the rivers changed later, we were able to use that information to get an allocation to the river even after it changed, whereas if we didn't have a permit, we would not have been able to get an allocation anymore for that new parameter, and then it could have shut down a plant. But because we had that information from like 1968 and we were able to find it, that made all the difference in the world. We talked about spreadsheets, like for TRI. That's the way most of us do it. We've got DMR spreadsheets, land application spreadsheets, but a lot of the times when I do audits, numbers don't quite look right. So following the math in a spreadsheet can be kind of difficult, but you need to make sure that you double check them, because I find lots of errors in them. I talk about down here locking cells, checking often. It's easy to get something changed while someone's entering data or something, and cells get changed. So even on a spreadsheet, all the columns are right, but one of them got changed. So you do a random check, and these 8 months all looked good, but I didn't check July, and July's is the one that was actually off. So what I'll typically do for stuff like that is actually put in values, get a blank one, put in values that I know what the answer should be, so I can quickly check the answers and make sure that they're working as a 1 week to do a real quick check. But that's a problem I found several times. Documentation, a lot of places aren't documenting things well. They're not keeping the proper documentation. NPDES, wastewater discharge permits, you've got calibration records, sampling records. There's a lot of information that should be being recorded. Some people rely just on some of the stuff they're putting on a chain of custody, and sometimes that chain of custody, depending on where they get it from, doesn't have all the information you need, the exact location, time that it was being sampled, who was doing it. Most of that's on a chain of custody, but you got to be careful. So make sure that you look at those type of things. Non-compliance reporting is another thing that pops up a lot of times, both NPDES and in other things. A lot of permits will have clauses. If you have non-compliance, you need to report verbally by this time, written by this time. Those are the kinds of those details of know what you need to know, that you need to make sure you have available, that and other people know when it's due. Prohibitions of hauling wastewater, depending on the state and depending on the permit, whether it's allowed. A lot of places are bringing in wastewater from off-site to their processing plants to treat it at a system there. You need to be careful of that. A lot of states have rules. So it's definitely something that has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. Industrial stormwater permits. This is getting to be a really, really, really big topic. Things are changing, particularly on fecal coliform, but even just the amount of attention being pushed on it. In Georgia, the Redwater drainage has become a significant issue. The regulators totally understand it. They know where it's coming from, and they're taking their fairly good understanding and extrapolating it into things that don't exist. We're at some facilities that are further processing plants only, small ones, and they believe that the fecal coliform is coming from the tires because the trailer ran through Redwater back at a processing plant, and then 60 miles away when it gets to the further processing plant, they believe there's enough bacteria on those tires that's what's causing the stormwater fecal coliform levels. I've actually had that conversation, and they totally believe that that's what's going on at one of these sites. So there's some crazy things that we're going to have to be on top of. Again, it's a permit. You got to go through the permit and make sure we know everything that's in there. Some of these permits are starting to get very, very long on the amount of requirements between visual inspections, benchmark sampling, impaired stream sampling. Most of us don't have any effluent limitation guideline sampling. The sampling frequency varies based on results. So you may have 3 outfalls and you've got 4 parameters or 5 parameters in each outfall. Well, in Georgia, if you don't meet a benchmark, you only have to do that benchmark sampling once a year, but if you don't meet it, you have to start doing it quarterly until you pass it. But you only have to sample that outfall and that parameter. So all of a sudden, out of these 3 outfalls and these 5 parameters, well, I failed these 2 parameters at this outfall, this parameter at this one, and this one at this one. Now you got to start keeping track. So what do you have to sample next quarter? You got to be able to make sure that you're keeping good enough records that you know which parameters at which outfalls need to be sampled the next quarter. It takes someone really paying attention to it. So you just need to make sure that you're really looking at that correct sampling schedule. Following plan requirements, again, those type of things we were just talking about, but also the BMPs. Once you put together a plan, besides having permit requirements, what is in your SWIP plan, what you agree and what you sign off on that SWIP plan is basically your permit requirements. So once your BMPs are in there, if they say that you will do X, then that regulator is going to be expecting you to be doing X. So make sure that you know that SWIP. Make sure you're reviewing it when you're putting it together. Make sure it's a good SWIP. The SWIP is something you can review yourself. You can review it often. You can update it often. They want it to be updated often. So make sure that you understand what's in it. Containing red water, like we talked about, is becoming bad. Tracking, like we talked about. Illicit discharges. A lot of the stormwater inspections I'm looking at, one of the big things they're looking at is illicit or illegal discharges, things that are going on that shouldn't be going on. Wash down activities, vehicle trailer washing. Sometimes you don't think that that's happening, but I was at a site lately that the dock slopes away from the building, refrigerated trailers are pulled up. Well, no one's doing any washing outside, but from inside, they're washing that trailer before they load it. Everything that they're washing runs to the front of the trailer and drains out the front of the trailer, which is beyond my capture zone. I may have a nice trench right up near the building, so anything that washes out of the building when I wash or drips out of the back, I'm catching all that. I've got a great system in place, but this stuff is going out to the front of the trailer and is dripping out there and now going to stormwater. We can't do that. That's wash down water, processed wastewater, that's now being sent to stormwater. And that happens. It happens frequently. It just happened while I was on an audit with state regulators. So there's a lot of different things where you can see up here of potential problems of something that may be an illegal discharge. Air compressor condensate is listed as an exemption. You're allowed to have that, but only if it's quote unquote uncontaminated condensate. How many people actually have uncontaminated condensate coming out of an air compressor? Not very many. All you have to do is look at where that blows down and hits the concrete, and you'll see oil stains because there's oil in it. So things like that become issues. We're talking about in Georgia, it's getting, like we said, getting to be a very high level of activity. There's some third-party kind of lawsuits, complaints going on that states aren't doing their job well enough, so that has really increased their pushing. There's also third parties threatening lawsuits. There are attorneys that are going to the Georgia EPD headquarters and are sitting down and going through records and files at the office, making copies of files at the office, just looking for potential problems. So the level of where we are with that is increasing and looks like it's going to continue to increase. Air permits, making sure everything's accounted for. Some of our facilities have a lot of things, particularly further processing plants, cooking plants. We got to make sure all the vents, anything that needs to be permitted is permitted, and we have good records that it was permitted. Some things may be exempt. Excuse me, usually there'll be a letter, like ADEM will issue a letter issuing and letting you know that it was exempt. You need to keep a copy of that, because 5 years later, someone else is working in that office and they're asking, and they're like, well, why don't you have a permit for this? Well, it was exempt. Can you show me that it was exempt? So you need to be able to make sure you have those kind of records. So that's come up several times. Toxic release inventory, we talked about nitrogen. Like you said, nitrogen is very difficult. We talked about ammonia, and we talked about nitrate, and how do you calculate it. Again, like your test results are only ammonia as nitrogen, not as ammonia. And nitrate is just the nitrogen portion. So you got to make sure that the math is being done well, because there's a whole lot of specifics, like we were just talking about. So, making sure we're looking for all the listed chemicals. Again, he had mentioned peracetic acid and hydrogen sulfide. Those are two that are new, and that hydrogen sulfide's only been having to be reported for the last couple of years, and peracetic acid's kind of new to the industry. Some plants have been using it for multiple years. The last 2 years, more and more plants that we talk to are starting to add it, and some of these things start getting done without other people knowing. They're just all of a sudden they're showing up at someone in processing gets it set up. We need to make sure everybody's aware of the consequences when new things show up. Maintain records of assumptions you used, calculations you used. I've been to a lot of places, they have nice copies of their forms, but they don't have any sort of records of the inventories, data, how do they do the calculations, what was used, how'd you come up with these numbers. You may say that certain things aren't reportable, and that's great, but you still need to be able to answer that question, well, why didn't you report for ammonia last year? You reported the 3 years before, but you didn't report last year. Well, I didn't need to, here's my calculations. So keeping records of those kind of records are important. Tier 2s, probably go through quick, you've already been looking at that. Lead acid batteries is one of those. It's got lead, which is reportable. It's got sulfuric acid. It can be done either as a mixture or there's individual components. Once you start one way, you want to make sure that you continue to do it that way. Checking units. I've actually had facilities reporting in other units like gallons. I've had diesel tanks being reported. How much diesel do they have, and they reported it in gallons. Everything on tier 2 should be pounds. So just make sure that the numbers are working for you. Maintaining records, again, just like we talked about for TRI. For tier 2, go ahead and make sure you have some sort of, the records to back up the numbers you're using, whether they're inventory records, purchase records, physical tank size records. Try to make sure you have that type of stuff. And then submittal records, having some sort of record for showing that things were submitted to be able to prove that was done, particularly now that there are several different types of e-filing going on, different ways of doing it. Georgia's using the e-plan. When they first did it, they came out saying, and this is great, you only have to do the one e-plan, you don't have to submit it to anybody else. Now, the last couple of years, they kind of backed off on that because some of the planning districts actually want a copy of it. So, and they realize that the law kind of maybe doesn't allow them to do that. So they say that it should count for all of them, but you still need to verify with your county EMA and your fire department that they don't need a copy directly. So you have to kind of take that extra step just to make sure. SPCC plans we were talking about also. There are industry standards, particularly on things like inspections and testing. The new SPCC plans regulation kind of really emphasizes these industry standards and being in compliance with them. So that when you look at inspection and testing requirements, that's where those numbers, and as far as how many years, what frequency should you be inspecting, that's where those are going to come from, those kind of documents that we have up there, like API 653 for large tanks. Another one that we see a lot is like containment volumes. There's not a specific, but you want to just make sure that you're being careful. A lot of people use the 110% rule of thumb. That rule of thumb doesn't always apply. If you have a very large containment structure, large footprint with a single tank in it, 110% of that tank may be, like say, 2 inches or something. We get over 2 inches of rainfall fairly often. So that really 110% may or may not give you very much storage space. So you kind of want to look at, what is my actual storage space over the 100%, and is that adequate? We would typically do, particularly working with people building something new, we're always going to look at the 25-year, 24-hour storm event, and we're going to provide the 100% plus whatever that physical distance is. And not only do you look at, say, your 25-year storm event is a 7-inch rainfall, you don't just add 7 inches to it because you have tanks in there taking up volume. So you have to look at what is 7 inches volume and what is my space that actually absorbs it. So to go 7 inches may need 9, 10 inches of storage depending on what's in that requirement. So you want to be a little careful on that. Training is one we also see. And tank alarms, tank level alarms, that there's a way to actively measure that tank when it's being filled. Greenhouse gases, monitoring, record keeping, making sure that you know what needs to be done. RICE rules have come out. These are for internal combustion engine. It's mainly maintenance and documentation records. Again, it's mostly record keeping, but you need to make sure that you know the devil in the details on them. NESHAP, we were talking about earlier with James. Again, annual compliance certification, record keeping. Has waste reporting. And this one gets interesting because of making sure you actually know what you've got, when you're generating. Are you actually keeping records of your accumulation period? There's specific requirements on how long you're allowed to accumulate hazardous waste before it's sent out. That's probably one of the bigger things I don't see done well is that accumulation, that tracking that usage and tracking that generation. This is based on your monthly generation as far as your quantities. So this is one of those things that's not beneficial necessarily to store up an entire year and then dispose of it at the end of the year, because you may be trying to show a much larger number at one time. If you're doing that and if you could ship it off sooner, you're probably better off. Keeping records of exactly what was generated each month is the best number, because now that's going to keep those monthly generation numbers smaller, and that helps keep you out of higher levels of regulation. The reporting requirements, you need to make sure you check the states also. Some states have different requirements, such as Alabama, and that gets into other things like that. You'll see scrap tires and used oil. Another one here, underground injection control. We're just talking about subsurface injection. In our industry, we have a lot of feed mills that may have septic tank and drain field system for boiler blowdown. I've seen these at truck shops. I've seen some hatcheries that have them. It's not that you can't do it, but the regulations controlling them are changing and have changed. In Georgia, they had to be reported that you have it and apply for a permit. It used to only be regulated by the local county health departments. But if it's anything other than septic for up to like 20 people in Georgia, then it crosses over into this type 5 well. It has to be permitted by the state. That can get into monitoring wells, state permits, et cetera. So there's definitely other requirements out there. Again, scrap tires, medical waste, erosion control permitting. Most people are familiar with their erosion control permitting, which is typically by the state. The rules are set by the state. However, each jurisdiction can actually make more stringent. Here in Georgia, in the Gainesville area, the city of Gainesville has their own erosion control requirements, and the county, Hall County, has their own erosion control requirements. The state's requirement is anything disturbance of 1 acre or greater. It used to be like 5 acres. It's down to 1 acre now. These two are down in like the 10,000 square feet or 5,000 square feet, and the other one is like 1,000 or 1,200 square feet or something tiny. Anything over that 1,000 square feet for either the county or the city, they want an erosion control permit application. They may or may not make you do anything, but you have to do that and go through them first. So at one site has both county and city on the one site. So you're dealing with the city, the county, and the state on erosion control for a fairly small project. EPCO 302s we already talked about. Another one, EPCO 304, we didn't. Again, that list of lists that he talked about is the great document. One of the columns is for 304, and that's your reporting threshold if you have spills. So if you need to find out how much you can spill, at what level, what threshold do you have to make reporting for, that's a great document for it. That reporting gets into a lot of details on what needs to be done, but again, one of those know what you need to know, make sure you understand the reporting requirements. General permit applications, make sure you're considering all the discharges and all the processes at the plant. Process changes, things happen. We were just talking about parasitic acid. It's showing up at some plants and no one really knew until all of a sudden they're walking and there's 8 totes sitting out of parasitic acid on the side of the building. Have a way to make sure that any changes at the plant are being looked at. Regulatory compliance tracking program. If there's some way to make sure that we're tracking all these requirements. There's a lot of different permits here. We're talking about a lot of different requirements on inspections, testing, sampling, record keeping, trying to have some way that you can track that. Some people are putting together good spreadsheets. Another one that I like, most of the processing plants have a really good maintenance management program, a good task management program for maintenance. Utilize that same software and let them set up environmental compliance as a separate department. And under that department, each permit can be a piece of equipment. So you've got a stormwater permit as a piece of equipment, and that equipment has frequency of inspection testing of tasks that have to be done. You can make all of your requirements under that permit show up as a task, including permit renewals. So now something that needs to be renewed in 5 years, you can have it set that, the 12 months in advance. It gives you a notice that you've got to do that. So it's some way to help try to manage that. Documenting follow-up actions is another big one. Stormwater inspections. You may find where you documented that something wasn't quite right, and that's good. It's okay to document it. You can document it, take care of it, and fix it. But now you need to make sure you document that you fixed it. That follow-up documentation that it was done and taken care of and when it was done is extremely important. And that's one of those things I don't see a lot of times. Boneyards, we all know that can be a place that's out back. There's only a couple of people that see it. The people that are taking stuff out there don't have any knowledge or concern about what they're dumping back there, and you can find lots of things. Even if it becomes somebody's inspection, that they're inspecting it once a week to make sure that nothing's out there that shouldn't be out there, and that things are trying to be managed in the best way that they can. And then, as we talked about before, the first impressions and visuals are extremely important. Making sure records are available at the site, and then practicing, going through it yourself. So the best way is, once you kind of think you're getting a good handle on things, do internal audits. Let the people at the plant know this is just, we're trying to find out what we need to do, what we're doing good, what we're not doing good, how can we improve. But until you do something like that, that's the best way to really find it. So those can be really critical. The records available at the site, it's kind of important to note also, some things will have to be at the site. A lot of times someone from corporate's doing something, but those records then don't get back to the site. It's good to make sure that all those kind of records that need to be at the site are at the site. That goes for like TRI reporting, calculations, things like that. If they're auditing it, they may be at the site, just looking and asking questions there. It'd be good to have that local. And that's it, guys. If there's any questions, feel free to ask, or you can try to grab me later too, and we can go through it, because I know we went through a lot of that pretty quick. Appreciate it.
This message was brought to you by the U.S. Poultry and Egg Association. Funding for this video was provided by the International Poultry Expo. Please support our exhibitors, and we invite you to attend.